I've always been an allergic person. So I had pollen allergies since I was a kid. I had asthma when I was a kid. I was allergic to bees. So I was that kid that was allergic to everything. And I was the only one back then. And then later, I started to have eczema on my skin, which was very, very severe. I reversed that. However, I'm still very sensitive and I have a lot of food sensitivities. So I have food allergies, I'm sensitive to many things. So in a way, I'm able to manage my symptoms. And mainly it's by lowering inflammation, because eczema is a condition that is driven by inflammation. So in a way, I was able to kind of lower the inflammation in my body, reverse my symptoms, kind of manage my symptoms. But it didn't take away the fact that I have food allergies. I'm allergic to pollen. I'm sensitive. I'm an allergic person. And that's when I started to think, can I reverse that? Like, why am I like that? And that's when I find out that this starts when you're a child, and it's very difficult to change, unfortunately. So in the first year of life, we set up our immune system, and there is something very important that happens, which is T-cell differentiation. You form these cells called Th1, Th2 that are important for the immune system, and the microbiome drives that. So if that's not in balance, your immune system might be set up so that you're hyperreactive, so that you're reacting to too much to too many things, and that's allergy. So I believe that's what happened in my case, and that's what we're trying to change. Later in life, I took a lot of antibiotics, actually. So there was a time in my 20s that I took several cycles of antibiotics, and after, my eczema started to get worse and worse. We cannot tell if that's the cause, but of course, it could make sense, and there's good reasons to believe that it could be connected. That is potentially something that happened there.
This episode of Levity is brought to you by Vitalism Foundation.
Vitalism Foundation is a non-profit with a revolutionary mission to achieve unlimited lifespans in peak health.
You should really join us. Follow the link in the description below. Nora Cavani, welcome to Levity.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Patrick. Thanks so much for having me.
It's interesting because we talk about longevity and solving aging in this podcast, but today we're actually going to discuss child health. But there is a connection, right? And we'll get to that connection in a bit. But first of all, can you briefly explain who you are and what your background is, and how you came to start this very fascinating company that's called Alba Health?
Of course, and thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this important topic. So my name is Nora, and I have a background in biotechnology, pharmaceutical engineering. I've been myself a biohacker for quite a long time. I actually set up my own little lab when I was 17, 18. I started to make my own products for my skin because I always suffered from eczema, which is an inflammatory condition of the skin. And I've been trying to get better with my eczema for many years. It actually got worse. When I was 27, I became very ill. I started to have very severe eczema on my entire body. And at that point, I really had to do something about my health. And I ended up changing my diet, my lifestyle, and that reversed my symptoms. So that was kind of the transformational experience in my life, becoming a very kind of ill person, reversing that, and then thinking, why me? Why did I have that? Why am I such a sensitive person? Also, because if I were to go back to an unhealthy lifestyle, I would probably get my symptoms back. So I started to really think, why are there chronic diseases in this world, and why are they increasing so much? Because when you have a chronic disease, it's very hard Of course, you're not healthy, and it's very hard to even work on longevity, on reversing aging, because you're not healthy in the first place and you have so many restrictions in your life. And I discovered that the gut microbiome, so the microbes that we have in our gut, are super important in childhood. And that in childhood, so many things happen. We actually set up our health for life. There's some things that happen there that shape your health for the rest of your life. So I thought that was so fascinating. And I thought if we can act in that time frame, perhaps we can prevent chronic diseases and even eradicate them. So I thought that was so fascinating. It was something I couldn't stop thinking about. And that's when I started Alba.
Tell me about you set up a lab. You said that you were a teenager. Why did you do that? Was that because of your health problems, or was it of some kind of
Yeah,
other curiosity?
I think I've always been so interested in biology and science. It really started when I was like maybe 11, 12 years old. Once I learned about the DNA, what it is, what it does, I thought it was so fascinating. And I went on to study biotechnology because of that. And I had eczema back then. So it's inflammatory condition of the skin. Your skin is basically broken. It can bleed, it can become infected. It's something that disrupts your sleep, your stress level. It can be very, if it's light, maybe it's not a big problem, but once you have it on a big portion of your body, it can really impact your life so terribly. And I started back then to make my own products for the skin because it was hard back then to find good products. So I started to research skin health and how the skin is composed, and I started to do that a bit as a hobby. And I actually later on worked in research on skin. So that was a big thing that I was passionate about.
You're from Italy, no?
Yes, yes.
Where in Italy?
Near Bologna. I'm from a very small town in the mountains,
Okay.
quite far from cities.
Tell me about your path from Italy and to Sweden, because you're situated in Sweden now.
Yes, I'm in
Yeah,
Stockholm now.
yeah. And so I know that you've been studying. You have an academic background from Biotech University in Denmark, right? And you've also
Yes.
been at the Boston Consulting Group as a consultant for health companies, I believe. Can you
Yes.
share a little bit of that journey?
Yes. So I'm from a small town. I grew up in my mom's restaurant. And early on, I was so into science, and no one in my family had been in science. It was really a bit of a new thing for me. I studied biotechnology in Italy, and then afterwards, I really wanted to get into engineering because I thought it's great to learn about biology, but I want to apply my learnings. I want to do something more applied that can lead to solutions. I actually did my bachelor thesis on death and cell death. So I was really interested in longevity already at that time. But then I really thought I want to do something that is applied and helps people. So I found this amazing master program in pharmaceutical engineering in Denmark. So that's when I went to Denmark. I went to Denmark by train with a big suitcase with all my lab equipment. And it was a long 45 hours train ride. And I got to Denmark 10 years ago to study. And I did my master's there. It was really, really interesting. I got the opportunity to work in pharma companies. And then I switched to business, basically. I was in management consulting. Because again, I wanted to see how companies operate in health. I wanted to see how does a discovery become a product, and how does it end up in people's lives. So that's why I made that change.
The work you did for Boston Consulting Group, was that also in Denmark?
It was in Denmark, and I was based in California as well for some time, but I also did a lot of projects in Sweden. So it was international. And I was always in healthcare and digital as well, advanced analytics.
And I guess, well, first of all, why did you start the company in Sweden and not in Denmark? What's the connection to Sweden?
I actually started it in Denmark, so it's a
Okay.
Danish-Swedish company,
Right.
actually. Yes, I started in Denmark, and then I found incredible interest in Sweden and an incredible also willingness to try new things and new innovations. And I found my team in Sweden. So at some point, I really decided to make that change and really to move to Sweden and establish most of our operations in Sweden.
And you have a really interesting and fascinating scientist, a microbiologist, Willem de Vos, who discovered did discoveries in the microbiome several years ago. I don't know exactly what year it was, but he's been doing this for quite a while. How did you meet Willem de Vos, and did you know at that point that you were going to start a company?
At that point, I had already left my job and I was already working on this. I had already set up a company and I was already working on how do I help parents understand their children's gut microbiome and how do I help them take action and how does that link to health for the rest of life. But of course, there were many things I didn't know. And I thought I need to get a scientist on my team and I need to get someone from the scientific world to join me. So I called, I think, 50 plus scientists all around the world I pitched my idea and I explained what I wanted to do. And but many of them thought it was a theoretically interesting idea, but maybe they felt like maybe we need more research. A lot of scientists generally say we need more research at this point.
Yeah.
And one day I joined like a virtual conference with Willem, and I knew he was basically the number one scientist in this field. In 98, he found out, he was part of that group that discovered that you and I have a different microbiome, that it's linked to health. He discovered one of the most important or a very important bacterium that is linked to cardiometabolic diseases. So he's a very big scientist. And in the past decade, he has worked on the child gut microbiome and it's linked to chronic diseases. So when I joined this conference, I thought it was interesting to hear him speak and to hear the latest from him. And afterwards, I just decided to contact him, to send him an email. And I thought, no way he will answer me. But he replied to me within 5 minutes. And he said, this is an excellent idea. I've been looking for someone to make this a reality. Let's do it. So we talked straight away and it was an immediate match. He immediately understood what I was trying to do. And he confirmed and he said, there's enough to start. Sure, we don't know everything, but there's some things that we know and it's good enough to get started. There's plenty that we can already start using. So that was an incredible moment because that was really when things started to become more serious on the scientific side.
At what point was that?
That was in 22. So it was in spring 22.
It's a little more than 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And tell me about this bacterium that he discovered and what the relevance is of that.
So he discovered a bacterium called Akkermansia mucinifila, and that seems to be linked to cardiometabolic diseases. So obesity, weight, diabetes, hypertension. And it seems to be, some call it a superbacterium or superbug. It seems to be beneficial if you have it in certain amounts, while not having it or having it in low amounts is associated to these cardiometabolic diseases. So that was a great discovery 15 years ago. And then later on, he went on to actually develop it into a supplement and into a product. And there's already studies that show that it helps decreasing all markers of cardiometabolic diseases. So that's a fantastic idea, and that's also why I find him to be such a brilliant person, because he's also, besides being an amazing scientist, he's also taking ideas to reality in other
Right.
fields or in the microbiome field.
So tell me about Alba Health then. First of all, why the name?
So the name Alba means sunrise or beginning in Italian. So because we help children from the beginning of life, and we want to give the best start in life to every child, that's what it means.
And the knowledge that you have of the microbiome, how have you used that knowledge to develop what you're doing at Alba now?
So we started from Willem's experience, and especially from a big study that he did in Finland. So 10 years ago, he started a study called Helmi Cohort. It's a longitudinal study, which means that they followed subjects over time. And they followed 1,000 babies for many years. They collected gut microbiome samples at different time points, and then they know which babies are healthy, which have allergy, which have other conditions. So that's an amazing study, right? Because it connects the gut microbiome with health later, and also with symptoms along the way. And actually, last month, they published on Nature Communications, and they showed that the gut microbiome predicts health later in life. So you can do a test early on, and that predicts health, including allergies, later in life. That was basically what I found from my own research, reading all of these publications in my own personal journey. It's what Willem found out in all of these years of research. And we started Alba with this knowledge. And the first thing we did was to develop a research collaboration with that group. So we were the first and only company to make a research collaboration with such a group. You know, it's quite easy to start a microbiome testing company and just giving a list of bacteria to people. But what we wanted to do was radically different. We want to predict health. We want to be able to tell people what to do and how it relates to symptoms, not just knowing the bacteria. So that was the first thing we did. And then after that, we launched our own study in Sweden. So we launched that with Uppsala University and with 2 more universities in Belgium and Denmark. And we replicated that setup. So we involved 300 families in Sweden, and we collected samples over time. But our questionnaire was much deeper, and it also involved audios of crying of the baby and other types of data. So now we're really the first and only company that has this data set and this basis for comparing a certain person's or child's gut microbiome to a healthy, true healthy reference.
What's the status of that study now? Is it published yet?
Not published. We just finished data collection, so we have all the data. We're working on already on our first publications. We already see very interesting results linking the gut microbiome to very common symptoms in children. And that's the other thing. As we worked on this, of course, our mission is to stop chronic diseases. But what we also saw is that parents experience a number of symptoms, or at least in their children. A lot of children have problems with their gut. Either could be colic, constipation, reflux, diarrhea. There's many things that happen. Actually, more than 50% of newborns have these kind of problems. And they're mostly unresolved. There's not much to do about them. So what we found is that the gut microbiome is linked to those as well. And those could be more immediate things that we can help with and we can bring solution to.
It's so fascinating, and we'll get back to that. But first, maybe to take a step back, what is the microbiome, and what do we know about it, and what don't we know? Because when I hear the microbiome, I immediately, get scared, because it seems like it's so incomprehensible. So could you help me here?
Yeah, you're right. It's difficult to understand. It took me a while to understand this. First of all, the gut microbiome is the collection of microbes that we have in our gut. Viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites, different types of organisms. We actually have a microbiome not only in the gut, we have it on the skin, in the airways, so it's all over us. We are actually made of microorganisms as well. So we know that especially the gut microbiome is very important for our health. It interacts with our immune system. It interacts with our brain. Actually, 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. And it interacts with our metabolisms and the way we extract energy. So it's important for everyone. We know it's linked to health. And what's so difficult to understand about the gut microbiome is that it's like an ecosystem. Imagine it like a garden. It's more about the ecology of it than it is about specific bacteria. We cannot think about it as we think about vitamins, or, when we analyze the gut microbiome, it's not like analyzing the blood. When you do a blood exam, it could be that one vitamin is high and one vitamin is low. In the microbiome, it's also about the relative abundance of certain bacteria. So it's also about how they are relative to each other. So imagine one thing: if you have a forest, if you cut out all the tall trees, the small bushes might also die because now they have more lights than they should. You know what I mean? It's one thing affects the other. So that's what matters about the gut microbiome. So we know it's important for everyone. We also know we can affect it, and it really depends on our lifestyle. There is some genetic link, but it's not big. The majority of what contributes to our microbiome is due to lifestyle, diet, medications, antibiotics, probiotics, but also sleep, stress, exercise. These are the things that affect our microbiome. So that's what we know about the adult microbiome. But for the baby microbiome, we know something even more interesting. So we know that in the first years of life, there's something that scientists call early life programming. In those first years of life, we set up our immune system for life, our metabolism for life, our cognition for life. There's a window of time where that happens. And the microbiome is a key component of that and is a key contributor to that. So it seems that if the gut microbiome is disturbed in those years, that can have effects for the rest of your life, irreversible effects that are largely irreversible. So you see what I'm saying here? When you're an adult, the gut microbiome always matters. But when you're a child, it matters potentially even more because it sets your health for life. And what that means, and what I found really fascinating, is that potentially we can wire people for good health. Or if we do the wrong things, we might be setting up people for bad health. So what are those things? Those things can be antibiotics, can be C-section birth, can be formula feeding, can be the so-called Western diet, ultra-processed food. And what a lot of scientists are alarmed about now is that we see that our gut microbiome is losing diversity over time, generation after generation, because of these things, right? So, for example, in the US, there was a study that showed that 90% of babies lack some bacteria that shape up the immune system. So even Stanford reported last year that babies in Western countries are losing bacteria that are linked to the immune system. So this is really why the baby and the child microbiome is so important, because it can really have consequences that stay for life.
So tell me about your product then, because you are what by the way, what is the time window here? Is it up until you're 1 year old or 2 years old, or where is the deadline, so to speak?
So there's no actual deadline. It's more of a gradient as we try to visualize it. Up to now, a lot of even governments talk about this window of time, and they often talk about the first 1,000 days of life, and that actually includes pregnancy and the first 2 years of life. Right. However, and also that's also what Willem found in his studies. It's not really like there's a deadline and then afterwards you are how you are. No, it's not really like that. This priming and this programming continues, and especially, for example, for the brain, that's even longer. So he always said even the first 10 years are important. The way we try to explain it is the closer to birth, the more things are happening, right? And then after that, it's like a gradient. But we really believe that even focusing on the first 10 years, 15 years of life is important, because there's a series of things that happen. For example, in the first years of life, we also learn what foods we like and what foods we want to eat. So that's also important, right? Because if you like vegetables and fiber, you're going to want them later in life, and you're going to be better set up for health. If you really are not used to those, and for example, if you are used to sugar, there was a study actually published a couple of weeks ago that showed that consuming sugar in the first years of life is linked to diabetes later in life and obesity. So there's many things. It's not just the gut microbiome. It's also diet. It's also exposures. It's also psychological exposures. So it's very much, everything is connected, you could say.
Patrick, do you have something you want to ask, or should I keep going?
I have a lot of things to ask. I find this riveting. I find this so, I mean, I can just see the importance of this. I mean, it's potentially enormous, what this could mean in terms of public health, and of course also for the individuals, but in terms of public health. I mean, there are some enormous gains to be made here, right, in health, preventatively.
Yes.
So yes. That wasn't the question really so much as I just think this, I see the potential, and I think this is very, very exciting. Also, I have a lot of friends who have very young children that I'm going to pass on this knowledge. So, but the questions I have is about these things that influence the development of a good or a less good microbiome flora, and you said even psychological factors, for example. What would that be?
I think what I meant is that other things, for example, even psychological factors, can shape a person's experience and life and brain for life. So when I say like more things contribute to health for life, but stress affects the gut microbiome. So there's a link called the gut-brain axis that goes both ways. So stress actually affects the gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome affects stress.
I see. So how have one established that?
What do you mean, like in terms of scientists? Like how do we know?
Yeah.
So we know that bacteria and microbes produce compounds that then interact with the nervous system. So that's well established. And actually, one of the really fascinating things is that a lot of studies report an association between the gut microbiome in children and autism or ADHD. Of course, in adults, it's also correlated to Parkinson, to Alzheimer. So there's many correlations with these conditions. This is by far the most difficult connection to study, right? Because the brain is so complex. So at Alba, we focus more on well-being. I would say that the symptoms that are most closely connected to the gut are gastrointestinal. So constipation, or in children, it can be colic, diarrhea, these kind of things. Then the immune system, eczema, allergy, asthma, the connection there is very established because the microbes produce certain compounds that interact with the immune system. And then metabolism, so weight, diabetes, and obesity. And then I would say brain, that's the more difficult connection to study because of the complexity of the brain.
So the increase in some of these chronic diseases in childhood and young people, the idea is that this can be the cause behind it, that there are factors that have negatively influenced the gut biome, like you said, the overuse of antibiotics, you said, and C-sections, you said.
Yes.
How does that work?
It could be. More and more scientists make this connection. And for example, another key microbiome scientist called Martin Blaser, he is very known in this community. He has more than 600 publications. He and his wife, who is also a known scientist, they made a documentary recently that is called The Invisible Extinction. So they call this the invisible extinction, the loss of microbes in our gut. They said their hypothesis is this is linked to the rise in chronic conditions, and in particular, the use of antibiotics seems to be a key driver. So if we take a step back in history, earlier in last century, antibiotics changed healthcare and medicine, right? They increased our health span tremendously. Back then, people could die of a simple infection at any age, of childbirth, of course. And antibiotics changed that dramatically. Now we're not scared of that anymore. We have an infection, we take antibiotics and we're good. However, now we're finding out that antibiotics are affecting something that is us, which is our microbiome. It's like an organ. It's part of us. Like we cannot live without it. We cannot live sterile without microbes. So now we're finding out that antibiotics are killing those microbes that help us being healthy. And basically antibiotics, especially if they're broad spectrum, they kill almost all bacteria. So they're very disruptive of the gut microbiome. And the trade-off here is that sometimes they're needed, they're life-saving, but sometimes maybe they're not needed and they're causing more harm than damage. In any case, what we believe at Alba is that next leap in healthcare will be to figure out how do we nurture the microbiome, because we can't stop using antibiotics. We need to continue using them. Of course, we can we can stop using them if they're not needed, but we need to learn how to live with our microbes. That will be the next era in healthcare, in our opinion. And if you think, what the other thing we're discovering is that all food additives, all pharmaceuticals, all the things that are approved for our use have not been evaluated for safety for our microbiome. And we know now, and actually one of the things we're going to work on in our study in Sweden is the effect of other pharmaceuticals on the gut microbiome of children. Paracetamol, PPIs for reflux, a lot of other medications have an effect on the gut microbiome. We know that they affect the adult microbiome. But also food additives, and in general, living in very clean environments, not in contact with nature and soil. So we're finding out now that some things that made us increase our health span might be now hindering us and might be contributing to this rise of chronic diseases that are also restricting our lives so much. Because right now in the US, 40% of kids have a chronic disease, and 1 out of 3 has an allergic disease. When you have an allergic disease, you're very restricted in what you can do. When you have food allergy, Sometimes you cannot eat healthy, right? Because you need to avoid so many things. If you have asthma, maybe you can't exercise. If you have eczema, maybe you cannot also eat certain things and exercise because sweat is bad for your skin. So all of these chronic diseases affect your life, your health span, and your ability to live a happy life.
So Alba is, from what I understand, your product is providing a test for parents to purchase for their child. And you mentioned previously that we should think about the microbiome as an ecosystem. And from what I understand, you do this test with something called I have to read deep shotgun metagenomics technology. Is that why? Is that part of your thinking here, that we should view the microbiome as an ecosystem? So what is this technique that you're using, and why is it important?
Yeah, and we always say that Alba is more than a test, because we also give a diet plan and we give coaching with certified nutrition and health coaches that are certified for children. So it's both the test, but also how do you improve your family lifestyle. In terms of the test, yes, we look at the gut microbiome and we use shotgun metagenomics. So what this is doing is that it's looking at the full metagenome. The metagenome is the collection of DNA from these microbes. So the genome is our DNA, the metagenome is the collection of microbial DNA. So what we do is that from a poop sample, we extract all the DNA from microbes, we sequence it, and then we know what DNA is present. And from there, we use AI, you could say, random forest models, machine learning to derive which bacteria are there and which genes are being utilized there. So that's shotgun metagenomics, is basically looking at the entire metagenome. And this is different from other techniques that were used in the past or are still used, which are more approximate, you could say, and just look at proxy measurements. So this really looks at the entire metagenomes and even at the species level, at the strain level, so at the lowest levels of bacteria. And also it looks at the genes. So what are they doing also? And this is also why, one of the reasons why this is such an exciting time. Shotgun metagenomics really became accessible in the past 2 years. Before that, it used to cost like thousands of euros. And now it's much cheaper. New equipment came out, and now it can really become something that everybody can do. So this is also what is catalyzing an incredible exponential increase in our microbiome knowledge. So imagine a few years ago, or 10 years ago, we had hundreds of publications per year. Now we have 15,000 per year. It's an exponential increase in what we are learning about the gut microbiome, because these techniques are becoming so available. And we are bringing this technique, which is really research level, like university level kind of sequencing, we're bringing it to people, to the average person. So this is also very new. It's something that has not been done before. And of course, we analyze the microbiome, we compare it to our study, and then we give recommendations on what we know up to now that can be done. Of course, we don't know everything, but we start from what's established in science.
How much of a snapshot of health is this? Do you need to do it several times, or is this something you do one time and then from there you can kind of make predictions about what types of health issues the child might develop?
Even one is very helpful. So from one, you already get quite a comprehensive view and a good plan and good tips for the future. However, the microbiome develops in a curve. So when we're born sterile. There's nothing. And then at 2-3 years, the microbiome has a more adult-like composition. So it's like a curve. So if you do it at 6 months, if you do it at 12 months, if you do it at 18 months, you'll see different things. We're that granular, actually. We have defined very granular age ranges, and you can see different things at different times. And you can also see how it's progressing, because if it's good, let's say at 6 months, you don't know exactly if it will be good at 12 months, because so many things change for children. At the beginning, it's mainly breastfeeding, and then it's introducing the foods, and then it's more and more foods, then they go to daycare. So there's a lot of different changes. What we see actually in our users is that a lot of them decide to do it many times. And also what we see is that many report that their child gets better with constipation and eczema, mostly. Constipation and eczema are really the things that we hear many times. Parents say, my child looks better. Like they send us the picture of the eczema before and after. That's not surprising, because I've done it on myself. So it makes sense that diet affects and the microbiome affects these kind of conditions. So it definitely makes sense to track over time. Right now, our product has a well-being focus. So we do it for optimal well-being and wellness. But over time, our ambition is really to link the gut microbiome to symptoms. We already see that in our study, and to really help doctors as well, really get into the medical space and be able to, link that to symptoms at the beginning, but also then to prevent chronic conditions later.
Let's say that you take a test of a 6-month-old baby, and let's say that you can see that there should be a risk of chronic disease later in life. What is it in the microbiome that you discover then?
There's 3 things that are very established in this field. One is microbial diversity. So gut microbiome diversity has been correlated to health for a very long time. It's not a new thing. And in children, though, it could be that the microbiome is too diverse too soon or too little diverse. So it's different than adults. In adults, it's almost like the more the better. But for kids, there's like a curve. And what actually Willem discovered, and he published last month, is that diversity could be too much too soon. And that's actually correlated to allergies. So that diversity, and that it should be kind of appropriate for the age. So that's one thing. Diversity is really important. The second thing is that there are some bacteria that are particularly important because, for example, they contribute to building the immune system. One of them, difficult name, but one of them is called bifidobacteria. It is known, and there's so many studies about this, that they contribute to building the immune system. And when they are low, that's associated to allergies, to asthma, to eczema. That is extremely established. We can detect the presence of those bacteria and their abundance. And the good news is that there are supplements for bifidobacteria. There are probiotics. However, it's quite difficult for a person to understand which types, because there's many types and which products are good. So we advise sometimes on probiotics. By the way, we don't sell our own products, and we don't make any profit out of recommending these products, because we want it to be the unbiased advice and source of truth. But that's a really clear thing that we can find. And then the third thing is what we call pathobionts or unfriendly bacteria. There are some bacteria that can be present, and maybe it's normal that they're present, but if they are in too high amounts, they could take over the balance and they could lead to symptoms. Sometimes they don't lead to symptoms immediately, but they could lead to symptoms. And in general, they then suppress the good bacteria. So that's the other thing we can tell. And it's another thing that can be acted upon. But to be clear, we don't, at the moment, we don't predict chronic diseases, but we do explain in very easy terms how these things that we know affect long-term health. and what they contribute to, for example, to the immune system or to the metabolism or to cognition and how they work. So it's very informative, very educational, you could say, and something that anybody understands. So it's in a way that it's easy to use, and also it's easy to understand what to do next. I think it's a great engagement tool. Sometimes we all know what's good for health, and you should eat more veggies. And should not eat sugar. But when you see the results for your child, that's very, very interesting, and for many people, it's an eye opener.
If a family is expecting a child and they hear about you and they say, "Well, we need to do that test," when do you advise them to do it?
The best would be in the newborn months, because in those months we know, before introducing solid foods, so from 0 to, let's say, 4 or 5 months, whenever they introduce solid foods, that's when bifidobacteria, these important bacteria for the immune system, are extremely important. And that's where the majority of the immune system development happens. So that is where we have the most evidence that those bacteria, if they're low, that's associated to disruptions in the immune system later on. And that, again, can be corrected with probiotics. So I would definitely think about it then. And then later, once solid foods are introduced, diversity is really important, and still bifidobacteria, and there's other bacteria that are important. So once the foods are introduced, it's really important to get to a balanced diet, and especially also to shape tastes and preferences early on. There was actually a very cool study that was done in Sweden, in north of Sweden, that showed that giving Nordic foods, so the lingonberries, the different kinds of berries, the beets, all the kind of foods that are typical of the north, if you give them to children early on, if you increase that intake early on, those children are more likely to like vegetables for life later on when they're older, and they're more likely not to have gut symptoms. So it was really a study to show that what you do in those early years and months can shape your preferences in life later. So that's also what we convey and what we explain in our journey.
How many clients have you had so far?
So we've done about 1,000 tests. We started in the summer, or a bit before the summer. And so it's still early days. We got our first funding 1.5 years ago. So that's when it really went from an idea to building a team and building a product and launching the study. So now we can say that we have passed the 1,000 mark in terms of tests done.
So each test is also, of course, an opportunity for a consultation, right? And like, how many times do you meet with each client normally?
For now, we give one test and then it's one consultation, because we also wanted to give this in a way that it's affordable. But of course, what we're thinking about is how can we shape a journey where we can continue to provide, perhaps in digital forms, recipes and tips, and how do we continue to help parents over time. So there will be something coming up. We're developing that closely with our users who ask us for all of these things. So we're working on a new model also, where you can follow up over time.
So what's the range of the ages of the children that you normally are working with?
The majority are 0 to 3 years old. But now recently we have also extended our test to later ages, up to 10 and 12 years old. We've been able to collect some data sets, public data sets from all different continents, actually, that go up to that age. And we have a new collaboration that we haven't announced it yet. It's with a new study that has a longer follow-up than the one we did. So we've extended that up to 10 years, but by far our users are generally between 0 and 3.
So you actually see differences, cultural differences, dependent on environment and also what they eat and so on. You can spot that.
Most of our users are in Sweden, and cultural differences, hard to tell. It's more dependent on the diet. So it's not so much on the type of food, but whether a family eats a lot of fiber or not. Antibiotics matter a lot. The type of birth matters a lot, but also the age. Actually, the biggest factor affecting the microbiome is age. It's interesting because from a stool sample, we can tell the age of a child. It's actually incredibly predictive. And that is interesting because it means that the microbiome is really, really specific by age in those years.
I have to ask you, you mentioned this a few times now that you can predict age from your samples. I mean, there's a big discussion in aging biology that if we're going to test interventions, we can't really wait and see and to know if people are going to live long or not. So there's this search for biomarkers of aging. Could the microbiome be such a biomarker even in adults?
I think this is a different topic because in children, as I explained, you go from sterile, so from 0 microbiome to adult-like microbiome. So the diversity there predicts age. But then once it gets to its stable form, you could say, once you have a stable microbiome, then it doesn't change so much. So the change between a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old is, I believe, not as big. So this is true for kids, but not so much for adults. I'm not sure if that could be used as a biomarker for adults. I would assume that looking at gut microbiome diversity could tell you about health, definitely. But I don't think it would be a predictor of age, unfortunately. But I think it's a good question. I will look into it for sure.
So your clients, do they come to you because they've had a problem or they've just heard about you and they're curious, or?
A mix. So we have two types actually of users. One is what we call the health optimizer. So many people that are into longevity, that have tried glucose monitoring on themselves, that are really into health, that fully understand and they're fully bought into the gut microbiome, the importance of it. It's a lot of doctors, actually, a lot of PhDs, researchers, people in this field that just know the importance of it and just want to check. And then there's another type of our users that are people that had an actual problem. And they're similar to me, right? I've been through that. I've been through having something, going to the doctor and not being able to get help, and thinking within yourself, there must be something else. There must be something. I tried, I think, most tests on the market for pretty much everything, because when you have a problem, you try to find what's the root cause of that and what can I do. So we see a lot of, especially moms that have a child that has gut symptoms or eczema or these kind of problems. And of course, we always direct them to a healthcare professional, but the majority of the time they tell us, I've been there so many times. I've already been there. So they are looking to find out, is there something in my child's gut that could be off, that could be different? Sometimes we actually give them a letter to take to the doctor, and they have this discussion with the doctor. So it's an additional avenue to look into for people that really have a problem that they cannot solve.
If we go back to your own health problems, do you have any clue as to why they started, or and You mentioned before that in some cases this might be irreversible. So is it still affecting you in some way, or have you completely managed to get rid of your health problems?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because that's how I got to this topic. So I've always been an allergic person. So I had pollen allergies since I was a kid. I had asthma when I was a kid. I was allergic to bees. So I was that kid that was allergic to everything. And I was the only one back then. And then later, I started to have eczema on my skin, which was very, very severe. I reversed that. However, I'm still very sensitive, and I have a lot of food sensitivities. So I have food allergies. I'm sensitive to many things. So in a way, I'm able to manage my symptoms, and mainly it's by lowering inflammation, because eczema is a condition that is driven by inflammation. So in a way, I was able to kind of lower the inflammation in my body, reverse my symptoms, kind of manage my symptoms. But it didn't take away the fact that I have food allergies. I'm allergic to pollen. I'm sensitive. I'm an allergic person. And that's when I started to think, can I reverse that? Like, why am I like that? And that's when I find out that this starts when you're a child, and it's very difficult to change, unfortunately. So in the first year of life, we set up our immune system, and there is something very important that happens, which is T cell differentiation. You form these cells called Th1, Th2, that are important for the immune system, and the microbiome drives that. So if that's not in balance, your immune system might be set up so that you're hyperreactive, so that you're reacting to too much to too many things, and that's allergy. So I believe that's what happened in my case, and that's what we're trying to change. Later in life, I took a lot of antibiotics, actually. So there was a time in my 20s that I took several cycles of antibiotics, and after, my eczema started to get worse and worse. We cannot tell if that's the cause, but of course, it could make sense, and there's good reasons to believe that it could be connected. That is potentially something that happened there.
If we talk about diet, because this is such a we talk about inflammation here, and something that is very inflammatory is the discussion around diet and what to eat and what to not eat. How do you advise your clients when it comes to diet? Is there a lowest common denominator that you can say for sure that this type of food is probably not beneficial?
Yes, there are a few things that are common denominators that are true for everybody, and that we know that they affect the gut microbiome. So the first thing is eating a lot of fiber, vegetable, fruit, nuts, seeds, herbs. Eating a lot of fiber, we know that that's important for the microbiome because it feeds these microbes. The second thing is diversity of fiber. So if you only eat one thing, and I think unfortunately we tend to rely on, for example, wheat, corn, rice, a few crops. But before we started to mass produce these few crops, we used to eat many roots, many different types of fibers. So the more you can swap your usual bread to something different, a different type of fiber, the better. So diversity is really important. Some say you should eat more than 30 types of fiber per week. When I started my journey, maybe I was eating 5, because I was not eating, and I was buying always the same kind of vegetables, always the same things. Now I might have 15, even 20 types of fiber in one meal. So that became a habit for me. But when I look around in other people's plate, I know that that's not the standard. So fiber, diversity of fiber. Number 3 would be fermented foods. We used to eat a lot of fermented food, sauerkraut, kefir. There's different types from different cultures. They contain live bacteria. So those are really, really good for our gut. One thing that is really bad is ultra-processed food. So fried things, packaged things. I mean, the more you can switch to whole foods, the better. And another thing that we know affects the microbiome negatively is sugar. So added sugar, best to avoid. Those are the biggest, big topics. Sleep affects the microbiome.
Just to be clear, you're talking about added sugar. You're not talking about like glucose in a broad term.
No, exactly.
We need sugar in some amount.
Yes, definitely added sugar. Yes, added sugar. And in general, what we know is beneficial for the microbiome is to be basically in contact with nature as much as possible, right? Because that's where we exchange bacteria and microbes. So being out in nature, being in contact with animals, with pets, with leaves and bushes and soil, we exchange microbes with nature. And that seems to affect the microbiome. While, of course, pollution, being in overly clean environments, that is the opposite, has the opposite effect. So if I have to summarize it, basically try to switch as much as possible to whole foods and try to have as much diversity of fiber as possible. Try to avoid things that are processed. That's like the kind of basic advice. And you would be surprised how, it sounds like, yeah, I know, but you would be surprised how this is not part of our standard diet at all. The average person does not live like this. And even for me, and I thought I lived in a pretty healthy way before starting this whole journey, I realized over time that I could have improved so much more, and I can still improve so much more. So the challenge nowadays is that our food system and our environment, our society, how our society works, it's a bit set up against us. So we need to go out of our way to implement these kind of healthy changes. And at Alba, we try to make it simple, take the mental load out of it, and really give practical hacks and solutions to parents so that you don't have to suddenly cook 3 hours a day, but it's just switch this product for that and prepare this in that way, and that will be fast and but healthier.
Are you familiar with a dietitian called Ella Davar?
I've heard of her, yes, but I don't know her.
So, yeah, I met her there's a Geneva College of Longevity Science, and she had a talk, and she had a diet recommendation, and she said, eat 30 different vegetables and herbs. And so I wasn't sure I heard correctly. So I said, did you mean 13? She said, no, 30.
30.
And I was thinking, after 15, I couldn't come up with any more. So I said, well, this is a great opportunity to expand my culinary experiences. But she was also from like the gut microbes centric perspective.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Once you really start thinking about it, you realize how much our diet is centered around those 5 foods, 5 to 10 foods that we tend to repeat over and over again.
I don't know if you thought about it, but you know there are things happening in the US that there's a discussion about ultra processed foods with Make America Healthy Again, and this we'll see if anything comes out of it. It's a good thing that there's a discussion, but I was thinking that so it's RFK Jr. Who that's his cause, so to speak, and I was thinking, do you think that some of the things that he would attribute to vaccines, that it could be that it's the gut microbiome that's the problem?
We get this question so much. So many parents write to us and ask us, what do you think about vaccine and what's the impact on the gut microbiome? That's an excellent question, because as we said, our process to evaluate pharmaceuticals has not included historically an evaluation on the microbiome. So we haven't assessed that. So we looked into that in depth, and our conclusion is that there is almost no study on this. We don't know. But obviously, it could make sense that there is an impact, because of course, when you introduce such a kind of type of pharmaceutical, it affects many things in our body, and of course the immune system. So it's a super valid question, but to date we don't know. It's a good hypothesis, definitely. I share that. Yeah. Yes. Yes, definitely. And I mean, based on studies, recent studies, that seems even probably a bigger effect and a bigger cause. Because if you think about it, in the US, you could say 30% of children are born through C-section. C-section is disruptive to the gut microbiome, because when we're born, we get the microbiome from our mom through birth. If you are born through C-section, you're born sterile, basically. So that transfer doesn't happen. So 30% of kids are born through C-section. That didn't happen before, right? Then we have antibiotics. And in the US, 70% of kids under 2 take antibiotics. And as we said, antibiotics almost wipe the microbiome. And then you've got 50% plus that will get formula feeding. And formula feeding is another big disruptor, because, breast milk contains bacteria, probiotic bacteria, and it contains compounds that feed the microbiome of a baby. So if you take that away and you give formula, you don't have bacteria, so you don't get that transfer. You don't get those compounds that feed the microbiome. So those are the big 3 disruptors. You do the math, 30% C-section, 70% antibiotics, 50% formula feeding. And what we saw from a study in 21 that also Stanford reported on was that 90% of newborns in the US lack these essential bacteria for the immune system. So based on what we know, that seems to be, there's good reasons to believe that this is affecting generations, and this is really affecting the risk of chronic diseases.
Yeah, so that's something that Make America Healthy Again should maybe pay attention
Look
to
into. Yeah.
and do more research on. Talking about stuff we don't know so much about, as I said before, I'm a little bit scared of the microbiome. What would you like to learn more about when it comes to the microbiome?
So many things. I think that the biggest thing for me, it's always about how do we link it to symptoms specifically, and what do we do about it? So because I always try to translate things into practice, those are the biggest things, and the biggest things we're working on as well. So now we have identified a few correlations between the gut microbiome and symptoms. It's pretty clear. It also resembles what we've seen in literature. So it's quite clear that there is a correlation. Now, what would be amazing to find out, and what we're working on, is to see if we can affect it. So if through diet we can affect it in a precise way, so precision nutrition, and actually eliminate that symptom. That's what we're really trying to do, and that's the most, the biggest thing for me that is immediate.
So is this part of the Swedish study that you're doing, or will that entail another study?
Part of it, yes. So the correlation, yes. And then there will be another study coming up on the intervention. And of course, Willem has done several studies on interventions that are super interesting. So he showed that with certain intervention, they were able to restore the gut after antibiotics and after C-section, which is of course great. And then next step is to see if that translates into health benefits as well. So that's kind of the next leap in research, and we're happy to have such data and to be able to develop it and pioneer this.
So you mentioned some of the things that one should be on the lookout for in order to affect the microbiome in a positive way. We talked about fiber, we talked about not overusing antibiotics and so on. And I'm thinking these are the very same recommendations that a doctor would maybe put to me. Is there anything, I mean, if we're going to talk about adults for a while, is there anything we should think about when it comes to the microbiome that maybe is not that is not affecting a child in the same way?
I would say exercise, important. Of course, for a newborn, there's no such thing, but for an adult, exercise is really important. Sleep is really important. Stress, really important. All of these things really, really affect the gut microbiome. So yes, and of course, it's always kind of the same things. Also, when you think about longevity and health in general, yeah, those things are highly important. And then I would say, yeah, medication as well in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there were the Hallmarks of Aging paper that came out 10 years ago, and then there was a revised version that came out 2 years ago, where they actually introduced a new hallmark, which was the microbiome. I don't know, I can't remember if exactly what they called it, but I mean, they did the explicit link from with the microbiome to aging. And I guess the first time around, they felt that the knowledge wasn't there, but it seems like it's all interconnected in such a way that the gut microbiome is affecting inflammation, and we know that inflammation is a driver of aging. So I mean, it's really interesting to think about that you could actually affect your longevity, your life in later years. What is the most far out horizon that you see that you could affect in childhood?
I think so. So, what symptoms? Or
yeah,
some even connected to Parkinson, Alzheimer's, so things that come very much later in life. So that's, but of course, some of these systems that we build in those years, so the immune system, the brain and cognition, metabolism, they will stay for life. Even some even link it to cognition, so like intelligence and kind of ability to perform well in tests, for example, at school. So there's many things that then build up through your life. If you're, have certain capabilities that you build early on, they will compound in your life.
And you said that you are interested in longevity yourself. Is this a byproduct of your health problems, or do you have this? Do you share the view that me and Patrick have, that we want to solve aging and live as long as possible in as good health as possible? What's your view on longevity?
I think both. I mean, as I mentioned, I did my bachelor thesis on cell death, and I was really into this. I really thought, why should I die, and can I change that in any way? So I started to look into it, and I started to think about, well, why do cells die? Why do my neurons die over time? And then I spent actually 1 year in research looking into that and into different cell death mechanisms. So I've always been very interested in this. Of course, when my health became compromised, then I was basically starting from minus and I had to first get back to normal. And then, of course, now having seen the impact of that in my life, now I'm, of course, always learning more things on longevity, always trying new tests and always trying to learn more. It's really like, I would say my life is about that.
This episode of Levity is brought to you by Vitalism Foundation. It's a community of action driven by Vitalism, a new moral philosophy whose first tenet is that life and health are good, death is humanity's core problem, and aging its primary agent. They're one of the few groups that truly understand aging as the emergency that it is.
Vitalism's goal is nothing short of monumental: to allocate 1% of global GDP to this project. It's ambitious, but it's exactly what's needed to tackle aging head-on.
As a member of Vitalism, you'll get access to a private community, exclusive content, and invites to special conferences. Plus, you'll receive insider prices on longevity wellness services from Vitalism's mission-aligned partners.
But more than that, you will be supporting a mission that's too important to leave to others to tackle.
You should really join us. Follow the link in the description below. For a limited time, you get 30% off forever. Just use the promo code LEVITY at checkout.
Again, that's 30% off forever with the promo code LEVITY. Let's make a difference together.
What kinds of tests have you tried that you find interesting, and what's your own longevity regimen, so to speak?
So I have recently I've done a DNA methylation test. I've been looking into this a lot. I'm, of course, having a testing company. I'm really into analytical validity, and so I look very in depth into what are the methods people use, and it's still a bit variable. I would say it's hard to say still which is the best test. The way I approach it is that I try to test many different things and try to compose my own picture based on many things. Of course, I test my microbiome because I have a lab, so I do that. I've tested hormones. I've tested my skin microbiome, vaginal microbiome. Those are also very, very interesting. I've tested cortisol, intestinal permeability, small intestine, leaky gut. Yeah, quite a lot, and a lot of more blood tests, more advanced blood tests.
What do you mean
glucose
by that?
Monitoring.
Yeah,
different. No, more, let's say, different markers in blood, glucose monitoring. Of course, I have my Oura ring that I really love. So those are the things. And then, of course, for some years, because I was so interested in skin, I even measured my electrodermal activity. So skin has electrical activity. Or I measured the rate of evaporation of water from my skin. So I measured a lot of things that are maybe not so conventional. Those I tested a lot of things. I think the first thing for me, you asked about my longevity regimen or what I do. For me, the first pillar is diet. I really need to be on my diet. And as I mentioned before, if you see my lunchbox is a lot of vegetables, a lot of seeds, a lot of herbs, some fermented foods. So it's sometimes 15, 20 fibers. And I make my meals almost all the time, not all the time, but like, let's say 80% of the time. And I know that because I've been living like this for a long time, I can have a dinner out, I can eat sweets every once in a while in an occasion, because 80% of my time or 90% of my time, I follow that. So diet for me is really important. Sleep is important. However, having a company, I'm not always best practice, I have to say, but I try to track it. And when I see that I'm a bit low, to really prioritize that. And then exercise. But for me, what is really, really important is purpose. So I really also saw my health changing massively when I started to work on this company, and I started to serve other people and to get the messages of parents saying that they loved our product, that they thank us so much for doing this, that I'm doing something with a purpose and an impact, that I really believe that that's part of health. And I think relationships and community is also another key pillar for me of having a healthy and fulfilling life. So that, and also mental health. I have psychologists I speak to every 2 weeks. I've had that for many years. I think it's very important, like without having a specific problem, but just taking care of mental health for me is like really important. So I think it's a mix of things, and I don't always manage to do everything perfectly as I would want to, but it's I see it a bit like the microbiome. You need to be in balance and balance all of these things, and I'm a bit less about going super hardcore about some specific things, but I try to get all of them. I think a lot of times in the longevity community, you see people being very extreme about specific things. I think it's a lot better to try to incorporate all of these different aspects.
Would love to hear Brian Johnson's reaction to that.
I spoke at this event. I know him. Yeah. I think we have some discussions to do there, but yeah.
He also says you do you. He means that you should have your own method. So I think he's open to that other people might do things differently. You mentioned skin. We talked about skin a couple of times now. It's interesting because I think that there are several longevity companies that are, you want a longevity drug, but there's no aging is not classified as a disease. You need some other endpoint, and I think skin is really interesting because you could also tap into the cosmetics industry if you had a rejuvenation product for skin. It's not really a question, more of an observation, but is that something you have thought about too, the importance of skin?
Yeah, definitely. That also started when I started to make my own products, products for my skin. So I thought a lot about oxidation. That's a really important thing in skin. You have a fat component and a water-based component of the skin. So kind of working on oxidation is really important. It's something I've done for quite some time. But I have to say, your skin also reflects what's in the inside, and the gut really affects skin. So I've done multiple elimination diets actually, and I saw that eliminating certain foods really affected my skin, both in terms of like blemishes or pimples, these kind of things, but also generally the kind of how the skin looks. So I think you both need to act from the inside, and then also, of course, from the outside.
Another thing that I was thinking about was that you mentioned the Oura ring, and you started using that quite early, if I'm not mistaken, maybe from the first generation. And then you actually got Oura, the company, as an investor, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell me about, were those two connected in any way?
So the first time I came in contact with Oura was when I was working on my master thesis on eczema, because I had this idea of reversing eczema with lifestyle changes already there. It was 10 years ago. And so I started to track everything. I started to wear all the wearables that existed at that time. However, Oura was not available yet. I know that they were working on it. So I saw this company was working on the ring. I saw the pictures, but it wasn't available yet. But they gave me this idea of looking at sleep and stress, because back then it was not so obvious that sleep would affect your skin. So that was actually an idea that I got for my master thesis, and it's what got me my first job, actually. So that was I wrote a post about how Oura changed my life in many ways, and that was the first time. And then the second time was then after a few years, I started to use Oura. So I had it for many years. And I saw when I had very severe eczema that my HRV was so low. So the heart rate variability should be high or as high as possible. I had like 15. So it was extremely low. And in eczema, it's very common to have this vicious cycle where you're stressed, you cannot sleep, you scratch, the eczema gets worse, so you don't sleep, so you scratch more. So it helped me to get out of that loop and to improve there. And it was one of the products that helped me get back in track and really reverse my symptoms. And then the third time that Oura changed my life was when the founder of Oura decided to invest in Alba, because that was a major thing. You know, Oura is now valued at 5 billion. It's one of the biggest consumer health successes, really, especially from Europe and from the Nordics. So when he believed in this idea and decided to back it, that was huge. And that's what helped us get our first funding in place. So yeah, it's a nice story. And I feel very connected with that product.
Connected in more ways than one.
Yeah. Yes.
And yeah, your HRV, your heart rate variability, what did you get it up to?
In the 40s or 50s, wow, depending. Yeah,
because mine is lousy as well. It's also like, you know, between 15 and 20. I do have a blood disease, thalassemia. Mm-hmm. It could be related to that. No matter how I try, whatever I do, I can't get it up. It's really frustrating. So it's just interesting. Wow, from 15 to 40, that would be something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all of us, we have a certain baseline, or, you know, where our body is at. I think for me, exactly. And that's a power of testing and of devices, of really seeing where you are later, and how this affects. Because once you have seen it once, then you're like, okay, now I understand that this is really important for me. So yeah, no, I think it's also, and that's why biology and medicine are so fascinating. There's no certainty, and there's no 100%. Everybody is unique. So it could also well be that your baseline and kind of level is different than mine.
It's a bit scattered now. I'm just jumping all over the place. But I was also thinking about, you mentioned this new technique for measuring the microbiome, and how it has led to an explosion in knowledge. What might we learn from this new technique? What is on the horizon here?
I do believe so. First of all, in the past couple of years, we had the first 2 FDA-approved pharmaceuticals based on the microbiome. So the microbiome could open really a new era of diagnostics, but also of therapies. I'm not sure if you've heard about fecal microbiota transplant. So it's essentially taking the microbiome of a healthy person and putting it into a person that has a certain condition, and that has shown to cure basically Clostridium difficile infection, which is a terrible infection that happens in the gut. And now there's a lot going on IBD, on other conditions, especially Crohn's disease and especially ulcerative colitis, which are diseases that are becoming more and more common. And then in diagnostics, I mean, of course, for us, the child microbiome space is, I believe, is going to be the first breakthrough. Also because the child microbiome is simpler than the adult microbiome, and the adult microbiome is so variable between different people. There's also a lot that could happen in vaginal microbiome. So we see that the vaginal microbiome is associated to pregnancy complications and to fertility. Fertility is a huge problem. So I really do believe that we'll see innovation there. There's something that could happen also in the oral microbiome, but also to see how the microbiome could enhance effectiveness of certain drugs. For example, in chemotherapy, we know that the microbiome, a certain microbiome could make a chemotherapy effective or not. So there's many things there. I think definitely we'll see applications of the microbiome in obesity and weight. It's a big topic, of course, with the GLP-1 topic. So there's many things. I do think that wherever the microbiome is simpler, we'll see faster application. So I think the infant microbiome, the vaginal microbiome could be kind of the entry points. I think the adult microbiome is still very complex. People are very different, and it's a lot to analyze and to take into account.
Do you think that machine learning could help you out there if you're talking about the adult microbiome?
The problem is that you need, we do a machine learning. That's a normal in microbiome science. The thing is that with adults, you might need 100,000 samples to be able to see a signal. While with children, you need more, maybe hundreds. So wherever the microbiome is simpler, you just need less samples. And I think what's also interesting is that in children, most children are born healthy, but then a year later, 30% have eczema, 10% have allergy. So you have this kind of accelerated timeline where you see the before and after. While with adults, it's really hard to see the before and after, because how do you know, and how many people do you have to enroll to just have some that will have cancer, and then which cancer and which kind of disease? Like the complexity and the segmentation of all of these things is very high.
Right, but it's more of a data collection problem maybe than a machine learning algorithm problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a data availability problem. So wherever there is data, it's always about the data. I mean, the machine learning also depends on which data you have. So wherever data collection is cheaper and faster, and you see the before and after faster, the better.
Would you say that there is a consensus, a scientific consensus, on the basic idea that there is this window for children, or are there controversies here?
So yes, however, the big debate in the scientific community is we don't know about causality. So we know the associations exist. We know causality exists in animals. So we actually, if we take the microbiome, there was a study now in Denmark recently. If you take the microbiome of a child born through C-section and you put it into a mouse, they will become obese, or they will develop obesity. And in some cases, they will also develop asthma and damage in the lungs. So that is causality in animals. But of course, we cannot replicate that in humans, right? We cannot give antibiotics to people. We cannot cause a disease in people. So causality becomes nearly impossible to study. So a lot of people that are detractors of this field say, oh, there's no causality study, so we don't know. However, I mean, there's no causality studies because it's almost impossible to do those studies. And there's no causality studies to show that climate change is due to human activity, right? But there's good reasons to believe that that's what's happening, and then we need to change what we're doing. So it's a bit the same here. There's no causality studies. However, there's strong association studies, there's causality in animals, there's studies that show the mechanisms by how bacteria interact, for example, with the immune system. So there's good reasons to believe, and big scientists in this area say there's very good reasons to believe that we need to change something. So that's a bit where the debate comes from. The fact that we cannot study this in a certain way.
Yeah, there's always this risk-reward discussion. I mean, the risk of doing nothing, as Peter Attia often says, is that things get worse, and even though we don't have established causality, we might actually make people's lives and children's lives better, right? And I mean, it's not like you're doing it through some untested medication or some unproven methods. You're talking about, get your kids some more fiber.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also low risk, things that have no risk and already are within what's recommended by a country's guidelines, right? Because all of these things are within what's recommended. There's no like new untested compound. It's all stuff that is available already to people, and it's already recommended by a government. So there's basically virtually no risk in doing it right. And it's already consensus that all of this contributes to a healthy life. So it's, and especially, also how we frame our report and kind of the key concepts we talk about, those are pretty established.
So what are your next steps for Alba now?
Our next step is really to continue to work on these correlations with symptoms, because what we want to do is to move away from the bacteria and really tell people more about the symptoms and what they can do. So we're shaping up further studies about this, really on how can we zoom into one particular symptoms and see that we can affect it through diet. We already have self-reported cases. So now we sell this test for well-being purposes, but we have a lot that say my child had these problems, now they don't have it anymore. So we're collecting all of these kind of self-reported cases. We might even publish on those, especially for those that gave us consent in the study. But then next step is really to do a study specifically on that, prospective study, and really show that that can be a viable solution. So that's for us the next leap, really making that connection.
Yeah, so just to come back to if there's been any pushback, I mean, when you say, for example, that the formula feeding, for example, that is one of the causes of problems here. I mean, has there been any pushback from the industry? I mean, that's a big industry.
I'm sure. I think for sure there will be. I mean, as you know, the position of the government in Sweden and in most countries is that breastfeeding is recommended. So that is what the scientific community, what the governments, what the institutions also say. Of course, probably the companies that produce formula are not super happy about it. So we haven't heard of anything, but of course there's a lot of push on saying, yeah, but it doesn't matter. The importance is that the child is fed. But it is not completely true that it doesn't matter. It has an effect. And that's what science reports as well.
It seems like that there are no parents who would not like to hear what you have to say here.
But of course, what we say is always, you can take every decision you want. Every person should decide what they want to do. Even maybe after they talk to us, they might still decide to do a planned C-section, or to do formula feeding, or to give antibiotics. It's an individual choice. What we really care about is that people have this information, Because if you take a choice with having the complete set of information, that's completely fine. And even if you decide something, because there's perfectly valid reasons why a mother might decide to do a planned C-section or to do formula feeding. These are all individual choices. However, I think you should know this kind of information, and there's always something you could do after. So, for example, Willem has done randomized clinical trials showing that there's ways to restore the gut after antibiotics and after C-section. So there could still be ways to do something afterwards. So what we always say is, like, no matter what your situation is, what your choice is, there's always something you can do. We hear a lot of parents that feel maybe guilty or sad because they had to have a C-section or had to formula feed, or maybe decided to, and they feel conflicted about it. It's very personal and it's very individual. We never judge or chip into these things. The only thing we care about is that they have the information and that we support them through that.
Patrick, you said that no parent would object. I object. I didn't know I didn't know you offered these tests to up to 12 years old. I have a daughter, she's 11. So if I do this test now and then tell her to stop eat ice cream, there's going to be trouble at home.
Yeah, it's we get that all the time, and a lot. We get that all the time, and that's also why we incorporated the coaching call, because we didn't feel like it was good enough to just ship a list of things that you should do, and it's like, oh, to be super healthy you should do all of these things. We have the coaching call because in the coaching call we go through what are your objectives, what are your obstacles, what are the things that you don't want to change, your child doesn't want to change, and what are the things that are gonna affect them negatively in other ways, and what are instead the things that you can affect. Because life is a combination of many things, and in the end we're also optimizing, not only, at least I'm not only optimizing for my gut microbiome, I'm optimizing for the totality of my life and my life experience and my life intensity and all of these things. So there are always things where you might say, you know what, I don't want to take my daughter's ice cream away because it makes her happy, and she has this ritual and she has this moment, and that's really important. But maybe there's other things that are not such a big deal. That maybe if you swap yogurt for kefir, well, kefir has 3 times more live strains than yogurt. Is that a big swap? Is that going to be a big pushback? Maybe not, but maybe that helps them increase that diversity that they're lacking. So that's why we do the coaching, and that's why we believe this journey is so powerful, and so far it's been so appreciated. We had like 0 bad reviews so far, or bad comments, because people see that you don't have to do everything perfect, but you can still focus on some things that can be changed and that are not big trade-offs.
I guess I can modify my statement. I can say this is something that every parent wants to hear about, ideally before they have a child, and not many years later.
No, it's wonderful that it exists, I think, and yeah, we might try to do it. You mentioned the problems that newborns and small children in the US have. Have you thought about? I guess your market is global here, but you have most of your customers in Sweden right now, and you're established here and so on. How do you think about expanding?
Yes, and right now we're mainly in Sweden. We're available in other countries in Europe as well, but we find that it really takes some time to become established, to become known, and also to establish scientific credibility with the local universities. So that's why we focus a lot on Sweden. But of course, our rate limiting step is just shipment, so we could ship anywhere. Next step might be the US. because it's easy to set up a lab there. We have a lab partner already, and that's also a very interesting place to be, where I believe we can have a lot of impact and where there's a lot of awareness and interest. So really for us, because we are a software only company and we have a lab partner, so we don't handle the samples ourselves. We do the interpretation. Our thing is the interpretation and machine learning and the coaching and what to do next. So it would be relatively easy to set up in a different country. It's just about the lab and the shipping.
Yeah, Patrick, what do you say? Do you have any closing questions? I think we've covered so much ground, and it's been so extremely fascinating. And to talk about children's health, and this is a show where we mostly talk about aging and longevity and death and so on. But there's this good connection, and yeah, Patrick, is it something that?
Yeah, this was just really fascinating. Yeah, and you're a great ambassador for this too.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for helping me raise awareness about this. It's really an interesting topic, and you will hear more and more about it.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems that way. It certainly seems that this is extremely central and important to health for all ages. What about if people want to get in touch with you? They have more questions. They want to learn more about Alba. How should one approach you?
Definitely. So one of the best ways to connect with us is through Instagram, albahealth.co. And there we actually interview scientists every month. So we talk to scientists, to medical doctors in the space, and we talk about child nutrition and gut health, gut microbiome. So we really try to bring the knowledge from the experts and researchers to people. And also we collect questions even from people and we ask them. So we really try to establish this connection. So if you want to learn more, write us there. We always answer questions. We can, if we don't know yet, we can lift that question to our experts. And we have a lot of recorded lives that you can find on our page. We share content. We sometimes even upload it on YouTube. So that's the best way.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to include that in my newsletter. So Levity also has a newsletter where we do show notes for every episode, and we'll cover everything that we talked about in this episode as well. Yeah, Nora Cavani, thank you so much, and let's do another one maybe in a year's time or 2 years' time and see what has happened. I guess we'll learn so much about the microbiome, and yeah, it would be great if you would continue to teach us about this area.
Fantastic. I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Yeah.
Great questions.
Perfect. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.